Friday morning, everybody. Made it to the weekend after our first week after college football season begins. Short week for a lot of us. So we're back into it again. We're back into college football week 2 after a really thunderous opening to the season for Alabama. I think, Ben, we were on here a week ago pretty much confident about Alabama's chances of getting a win to start the season. But I'd be lying if I said I was confident that they would beat Miami as badly as they did in that game. And we're gonna get into that today for sure. But for everybody watching, welcome to Bammers. We do this every week during the season. We usually do it on Thursdays. We had a little bit of a scheduling conflict this week, so we're doing it Friday morning this week. But most weeks catch us on Thursday. And we're here to give our perspective on what's going on with Alabama sports and Alabama football, but most importantly, to get your opinion about what you saw last week and what you're expecting to see this week. So get your comments on the screen, whether you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, and we will pop them up. And I'll just give you an example here. Scott Clark said it's after 9:59. Where is everybody? So yes, I encourage you, like Scott, get in the comments and get your thoughts in. Tell us what you liked, what you didn't like, what's making you nervous. I know you're all Alabama fans, so you're nervous about this team even after a blowout win. But Ben, just in general, what were your feelings? What jumped out at you watching that game last weekend?
The level of dominance, I guess. I mean, you said you didn't have the confidence that they would beat them by 31 points. If we only had the confidence that Devontae Smith had going into the game,
he called it.
He called a 30-point blowout for Alabama, and people laughed at him. And who was laughing at the end of the game but Devontae Smith? I guess, the margin of victory can kind of be surprising at times, especially with these non-conference matchups. But I guess it shouldn't surprise us at this point when Alabama dominates another team, especially a team like Miami, which a lot of people continue year after year without learning their lesson. They continue to hope and pray that Miami is back. And I think it would be good for college football for a program like Miami to return to their glory years like they had, during the 80s and obviously during the early 2000s. But it hasn't happened yet, and it's kind of like a fooled me once situation. But Alabama was happy to reinforce that mirage that people annually bring up in terms of Miami coming back. But it was a really entertaining game. I think it delivered on a lot of the promise that the preseason hype gave us, especially what we talked about last week in terms of the 5 players each of us wanted to watch. I mean, Bryce Young obviously delivered. Jamison Williams obviously delivered. Henry To'oTo'o was fantastic. Will Anderson, he certainly lived up to the hype and looked like one of the best players in college football. So it was incredibly fun to watch if you were an Alabama fan, especially the first half. I mean, they couldn't have played a better half of football than what they did in the first half. Just absolute utter domination. Let their foot off the gas pedal certainly a little bit, as Nick Saban has pointed out since the game. But I guess the thing that really jumps out is losing Christopher Allen for potentially the rest of the season. Obviously, you never want injuries to happen, but these guys have to play the game. It's a brutal physical game where guys get hurt, and sometimes for the remainder of the season. But he's obviously a big loss. He made a big play when he got hurt in the game. So it was clear that he was going to be a very productive player in 2021. So to see him go down obviously hurts for Alabama fans, but it obviously hurts even more for Christopher Allen, who I know was looking forward to having a big season. So wish him well.
Yeah, and I think we always start to get that feeling watching big blowout games, especially early in the season. You start having this voice in your head, and I think it's because we have examples of it happening in the past of games that got out of control like that, and you start to see guys go down one by one. The Florida State game in that same building jumps out to me as an example of that, where the game was never close, and Alabama lost so much as a result of that game, particularly on the defensive side. Now, thankfully, a couple of other injuries in the game this time didn't seem to be as bad. Christopher Allen seems to be really the only long-term issue. But, a big disappointment, a fun player to watch, and hopefully he's able to fully recover from that. I think the other, I don't want to call it a silver lining, but if there was a position where Alabama could afford to lose somebody, it was probably at outside linebacker. They're absolutely stacked there. And as we saw, Christopher Allen was replaced by another 5-star player in Drew Sanders, who immediately came in and started making big plays. So as a team, Alabama probably seems like we'll be able to absorb that loss. You just hate to see that for Christopher Allen. Definitely quite a few comments in here so far talking about avoiding injuries, but also looking ahead to this week, and we should go ahead and talk about it, Ben. It's FCS week. It's earlier in the season than we typically see for Alabama, but we know that is always accompanied by one thing, and that is a big and loud rant from Nick Saban about complacency, about taking your opponent seriously, about not hyping this team up and making sure his guys don't think they're better than they are. Tony Boyd in the comments talking about complacency. There was a particularly good one in here from Scott who said, my Mercer buddy says this will be the year they score on us. He's predicting 56-3. Mercer's a weird team, and Michael Casagrande had a great story about it on AL.com this week. They are, we all know the teams that drive Nick Saban crazy from the FCS level are usually the ones that run some variety of, the wishbone, the wing tee, something like that. And unfortunately, Mercer seems to have something very similar to that. It has elements of it, but it's kind of its own unique version of it. So even the guys who've played teams like this before have not seen exactly what Mercer does. I think, Ben, secretly Saban likes weeks like this because I think he wouldn't get anything out of his team going out there. And I don't mean to call out anybody specific here, but I don't think Nick Saban would feel like Alabama got anything out of going out and beating down Akron, a team that's running a pro-style offense and just has vastly inferior athletes and does not pose any sort of challenge whatsoever to his team.
What are you talking about?
I mean, I just pulled that one out of thin air. I was alphabetical. It was alphabetical. I just was going down the list of FBS teams,
Hey, what time does Auburn play tomorrow, Matt?
I believe Auburn kicks off at the early game slot.
Okay. Well,
I believe they're in the breakfast notch.
Yeah, I mean, you better squeeze in all the tailgating you can as quickly as you can because I think kickoff will be before you know it, before you finish that Eggo or whatever you're going to eat. Get it in.
Yeah.
No, look, man, I mean, these games are certainly scary for a variety of reasons, but Nick Saban looks forward to, I think he looks at literally every piece of adversity or just really anything as a coaching and teaching opportunity for the team. So if they're playing Mercer, if they're playing Chattanooga, Western Carolina, these FCS teams, they're not on the same level from a talent standpoint, certainly, but there's a coaching opportunity in terms of teaching these players about complacency, teaching them about looking ahead on the schedule. Certainly there's Florida the next week where they're going to be traveling to Gainesville, where it's like, okay, we're in the headspace of Florida, but Mercer's coming to town. They bring a different kind of offense, like he mentioned, one that can be dangerous for Alabama, but could obviously give them the reps that they need to understand maybe a different style of offense and also physically challenging in terms of the way Mercer might be blocking with this system. So in Mercer, games like Mercer, as we've talked about before, are obviously they're minefields for injuries for players because look, Mercer is coming.
A lot of low blocking,
yeah,
for
and
sure,
they're not as good. They're obviously not as good a team as Alabama, but they are going to be playing football presumably, and they're going to be blocking and tackling and cutting and anything that could potentially put you at risk for injury. So it can happen in any game. It can happen at practice, obviously. So the point is that you get out there, you play, you get your reps in, you get better, no matter who the opponent is. That seems to be one of the mantras of Nick Saban: ignore the scoreboard, respect the opponent, etc. So it's Mercer, yes, but there are going to be lots of teaching opportunities for the staff and the team.
Yeah, and part of Saban's rant, Benjamin Willis brings up in his comment here, Saban was big on emphasizing, look, we basically played one half of football. That was the way he characterized that game. Was he said, we played a great first half, and then we sat back and kind of played an average second half. He can't even really make that much of a point here because Alabama still won the second half of the game too. But I do think it's an emphasis to him to not just get up big. I think it's very important to him to see his team maintain intensity for 4 quarters because there are going to be games every once in a while. And we saw it last year with the most dominant team, arguably, that Alabama has ever had. They still had at least one game where they really had to play at full intensity for 4 quarters to survive the game. And I think he just wants to know that they have that in him. He wants to know that the tank holds that much for his team. So I get it. I totally understand. I think a lot of people laugh at it and they sort of think that he's being unreasonable or he's setting expectations too high. But I do think it's important to know what your limits are and to know whether you've got the ability to go for 4 quarters like that. Another interesting point that got made in here, Ben, about last week, and I know there's only so much we can say about Mercer, but I do think this is sort of relevant to this week because we're probably going to see the backups for a good amount in the second half. Roger Andrews said, I saw 2 quarterbacks that will be better than we expected. And I think he's talking about Paul Tyson, who did get at least one series out there and made a really impressive throw. I know it's easy to overanalyze something like that, but he took a big hit in the chest and completed a pass for a first down. And I think people liked seeing that. Depth at quarterback has definitely been a concern coming into this season. And I think this week against Mercer will be a pretty good opportunity to see how much of a drop-off is there. How would we feel if we're ever in a situation where Bryce Young has to miss significant time?
Yeah, and you wouldn't ask Nick Saban that at a press conference, though,
no,
right?
Definitely not.
When's Paul? At what point is Paul Tyson going to go in the game, Coach? And you might be on the receiving end of one of those rants.
Although he did complain, by the way, yesterday that he's probably not going to get to work the young freshman running back this week, Kamar Wheaton, because he got a little banged up in practice. So Saban is aware that there's going to be some guys getting playing time this week that don't normally.
Of course he is. Yeah. Like he always says it. We hope to have the opportunity to play a lot of players. He loves to play a lot of players. He says that after games all the time. But yeah, I'm just curious, Matt, what did you think of his rant this week? Like everybody pointed this out. They said Saban's fired up coming into the press conference, and I watched it and I was like, it was a little lukewarm to me. Like this was not on like the extreme end of the Saban rant spectrum. Like to me, and it was like the rat poison reboot, right? Like it was kind of like one of those. It's like one of your favorite TV shows that ended a long time ago and was so great, and then they come back and do like a Zoom revival, and it's just like it's like a watered down, not as great version of it. So yeah, he tried to play one of the hits. It didn't quite click.
I think there were some unique notes to it that I'm not used to hearing from him. I do think that he has expressed in very subtle ways some concern about, let's say not necessarily the fact that his guys are able to get paid now with the name, image, and likeness rules. I don't think it's the money part of it. I think the concern is that can become a distraction, that can become a thing that takes a lot of your attention away as you're trying to set those things up and negotiate and spend time on them. And he, for the most part, I think has encouraged guys to try and do that stuff outside of the season. But he's not going to ban it. And Bryce Young was super popular and valuable before the season started. And after that game, it's only going to get more so. And we saw this week he signed a big media deal with Colin Cowherd, who I know a lot of Alabama fans already have feelings about. But that's going to take time for Bryce Young and some of his attention. Can he walk and chew gum at the same time? For sure. Lots of people do many jobs during the course of a week. I think that Saban would always rather football be the only thing everyone on his team ever thought about. And that's not realistic, but I think that's how he's always going to feel about it. But the other thing that he mentioned in that press conference, Ben, that was interesting to me, and this is kind of a relatively recent thing for Saban, but he's getting better at, I don't know, maybe I shouldn't say better. He's getting more generous about compliments over the years. It used to be very, very hard to get Saban to say very nice things about a player or a team. He was very stingy with it, not because he's not a good guy, but I think because he wants to make it count when he says something complimentary to you. He wants you to know that he means it. And I think to hear him talk about how much he likes this defense, that's an unusual thing to hear from Saban this early in the season, and it's probably a pretty good sign. I think to hear him talk about Henry To'oTo'o and how mature he is and how much Saban trusts him already, that, again, pretty rare compliment for Saban. And then another one last night on his radio show, he brought up JoJo Earl and compared him to Jalen Waddle. And you almost never hear Nick Saban compare a player to another player. So he's getting a little different, I think, as he gets older in terms of his willingness to praise people. And I don't think it's necessarily a weakness or a bad thing. I think maybe he's just a little more comfortable doing that.
Yeah, he's Nick Saban. One of his monikers could be the great adapter, right? Like he adapts to everything. He evolves with the times, and if he didn't communicate a certain way to his players before, if he sees now in the age of social media and the way that they consume information and the way that they take criticism has changed, Nick Saban will change that, and he will adapt with the times. You mentioned Colin Cowherd earlier this week, maybe perhaps to soften the blow with the whole Bryce Young podcast deal. Colin Cowherd went on about a 5-minute rant about how great Nick Saban is at listening to other people, right? And like changing with the times and understanding that he doesn't have all the answers. And if he thinks he does and sees that he doesn't, then he is willing to bring someone else in to help him understand better and make his team and players and staff that much better. So I thought it was a great point by Cowherd. Like you said, I know that a lot of Alabama fans don't love him, but that was interesting. People should seek that out. But yeah, you're right. I mean, he doesn't compare. It reminded me of one of his rants before when I think a reporter said something like, "Now, I know you don't like to compare teams and players," and Saban just cut him off immediately and said, "You're right, I don't, so don't ask me to do it." The guy was like, I'm not. But it just made me think about like his old rants, right? Like the famous rants from the Nick Saban era at Alabama. Obviously, rat poison after that Texas A&M game from a few years ago is now legendary. I remember after, I think a couple of weeks after Alabama had lost to Ole Miss in 2015, he had the dead and buried and gone thing where he was talking about how fans and people had buried them, and then they went on to win the national championship. The Coke bottle, ask the Coke bottle, but don't ask me rant is a big one. I remember somebody asked him, "Hey, what did you think of A.J. McCarron on the cover of that magazine this week?" Because they were preparing for a game, and he just ripped into that. I was like, I don't care about any magazine. He had the debate team comment, the stuff through a tin horn thing.
Yeah, I think the level of intensity when he does this kind of thing is directly related to how much Nick Saban feels like the attitude around his program needs to be adjusted. And so not having as intense of a speech like this could be a sign of him getting older and not having as much energy to do it anymore. Or it could be a sign that Nick Saban is less concerned right now about the mindset around his program. And the fact that he does it less and isn't as intense about it these days as he has been in the past might also be, and I'm just using logic here, it might also be due to the fact that the culture around this program is very different now and has become more consistent from year to year. And we're potentially getting to a point where he doesn't need to every 3 or 4 years completely remake the psychology of his coaching staff, his players, to where he needs to make them remember what made the program great.
Mm-hmm.
It might just kind of be there all the time now, because guys are coming in, they see older guys doing things a certain way, and they adapt to it. They're not, I think it in the early days, you had to sort of rebuild that culture with a new group of guys every few years, but it may be kind of more of a self-sustaining machine at this point.
Do you buy into the idea that Saban's rants are generally or ostensibly messaging to his team? Like
100%.
So
He
100%. So
he
you
does,
think,
well, sometimes to the fans too,
right.
but
Well,
not to the media. He doesn't care what we think.
Certainly, but like, do you think that he thinks, okay, the players are going to they're going to watch this press conference later, or do they think ESPN will pick up what I'm saying, AL.com will pick up what I'm saying, and it'll get shared on social media, and it'll reach the players, and then they'll hear this soundbite and they'll get the message?
Well,
I mean, he's around them all the time. He can tell them anything he wants behind closed doors at any time. So I just wonder, like, why go out? And I guess it's because he's speaking publicly. It's like maybe they'll feel embarrassed if I speak about it like in this tone. And
I don't know if it's embarrassed. I don't know if it's embarrassed, but I think he knows that the reason a lot of his players even came to Alabama in the first place is because Nick Saban is famous. He is well known.
Mm-hmm.
It's a big deal when he steps into their living room to recruit them because they've been watching him on TV for years. So he's aware that he has a public persona that reaches way beyond his locker room. So I think he knows that those guys see the stuff that he says. They're almost all on social media. They almost all watch SEC Network and ESPN, and they're gonna see the comments. And if they don't, it's also possible that it gets played on a loop in the locker room during the week too.
Yeah, see, I like to think that they have like a call sheet or like an agenda, an itemized agenda, where it's like at the bottom it says, all right, now at the end of your day, you're going to go to the AL.com YouTube page and watch Nick Saban's press conference from Monday, and here's the lesson that we're going to take from it. I just think that's interesting. I guess he gets fired up, and sometimes he'll kind of wink at the guys in the room. Sometimes
he does.
Where it's like, this isn't about you. This isn't at you. This is something else that we're trying to say here. So it's always interesting.
I do think maybe sometimes fans are imagining the journalists sitting there like sweating, like shaking. I
wouldn't put it past some of them though.
But they all know. I promise you, for the most part, everybody in that room knows what's up, and a lot of times they're smiling when Saban starts to go off like this because they know what's happening.
Yeah, and it's so funny because covering Alabama is not an easy job. Like it's a tough job, and certainly sitting in the same room and looking Nick Saban in the eye and asking him a question that hopefully won't set him off into one of these rants, or maybe, I don't know, maybe some people look forward to that. It's always entertaining. It's never boring, to say the least, I'm sure, covering Alabama.
So another thing I want to talk about, and we touched on it briefly a minute ago, is Bryce Young. And I mean, I think we all we didn't really see him extensively last year, didn't really know what to expect going into this game. And he has a performance in his first college start that honestly is pretty tough to find many faults with, pretty hard to criticize. And I've seen a couple of interesting comments in here. To Mike Gaines said, wondering why he didn't run on some of the plays when he had an open lane to get yardage. And it was very interesting to see that aspect of Bryce Young's game, that he seems to be very comfortable throwing on the run. And I think creating space for his receivers by doing that. There's been a couple of comments in here about Bryce Young in general. Anthony Bass said impressed with his pocket presence and awareness. Yeah.
I want to go back to that last comment where she said, I'm surprised he didn't run it more when he had the opportunity. I kind of agree. We certainly don't know what Bryce Young is thinking. We don't know sort of what his directive was going into the game, especially from Bill O'Brien, who has an NFL background, certainly coaching a guy like Deshaun Watson, where the whole point is protect your quarterback. Make sure that you do not take hits if you don't have to. And, I thought it was interesting. I don't think there were any designed run play calls for Bryce Young during the game either, because he is.
Oh, I don't think so. No,
he is clearly capable and very athletic, shifty, eludes defenders in the pocket pretty easily, which is a new element that Alabama hasn't really had the past couple of years, even with somebody who is athletic like Tua Tagovailoa. I would say even going back to Blake Sims is probably the last time Alabama had a quarterback that was this athletic and quick and somebody who was capable of escaping the pocket, picking up a first down with his feet the way that Bryce Young clearly can. But he obviously likes to throw on the move too. He's somebody who is mobile, but he can throw on the move, which is a dangerous weapon. And I just thought he was super impressive. I told you that I was kind of convinced after A-Day, just in terms of his pocket presence, his quick release, the strength of his arm. But really, now that he's playing meaningful snaps in a meaningful game, I came away very impressed, like everybody else, by Bryce Young. I think the future is bright for him in Alabama.
I think he looks like a nightmare to have to defend. And look, Miami's defense was supposed to be the strength of that team, especially the secondary. And even though they did lose one of arguably their best player in the secondary early in the game to a targeting penalty, those are some talented guys out there. Miami's recruited well on that side of the ball. The tough thing, I think, to know right now is, Alabama's offensive line really gave him a lot of protection during that game. Have to think they're only going to get better over the course of the season as they play more and get more experience together. But we don't really know what Bryce Young is going to look like when he gets more pressure applied to him and has to adjust. I mean, I think we got so, at least I'll speak for myself. I got very used to last year seeing the ball come out of Mac Jones's hands incredibly quickly after the snap. I mean, if he still had the ball 3 seconds after the snap, something was probably up. And that's not what the offense looked like to me on Saturday. But it also didn't look like it was supposed to look like that. It looked like it was designed differently. And we saw receivers get open downfield. It wasn't an issue of Bryce Young like sort of missing his window. I think we saw guys being hit in stride occasionally. We saw him working the outside of the field a lot. But I think more than anything, this is just a guy who has a different skill set than Mac Jones does. It reminded me a little bit of Jalen Hurts, right? I mean, I don't think it's exactly the same because I think Jalen was much more of a runner naturally than Bryce was, and Bryce Young is smaller than Jalen Hurts too. So you don't, as a couple of people are pointing out in the comments, don't necessarily want to give this guy 10 snaps a game running the ball where he's having to take hits, but his mobility is a very real and very dangerous. And I think if you're an opposing defense watching this, you're already thinking, God, my linebackers and my safeties are going to have to make decisions about where to go when they see him take off like that. I mean, there were several plays where it looked like Young was for sure going towards the line of scrimmage, and somehow the ball comes out before he gets there, and now there's a wide open guy.
Yeah, incredible field awareness and pocket presence, as people have mentioned. But they're right too. I mean, if you don't have to run, don't do it. Protect him. He's your most dangerous weapon. Ensure that he is able to do what he is best at. But he's clearly capable, right? Like he's capable if that linebacker is blitzing and he just needs to make a quick step to the side and elude him. He proved that he could do that against Miami. That's something that Mac Jones, obviously, that wasn't a weapon that he had. And the commenter is right in terms of it being a different season, that Bill O'Brien is not Steve Sarkisian, and Bryce Young is certainly not any type of quarterback Alabama has had before. I think he is a completely new type of quarterback with a new type of skill set who's going to carve out his own niche as one of the great quarterbacks of the Nick Saban era. And we're only talking about one game, right? Like we've only seen him play one real game at this point, but I think even if the sample size is relatively small, he convinced a lot of people. It was a pretty solid job interview, I think, for the national conversation So yeah, I think we're all pretty sold on Bryce Young.
Well, Ben, speaking of Bryce Young, we're for the time being. I don't know that we're necessarily going to do this every week during the season, but I did, while we can this week, I did want to do a play of the week. We've got a great crew of videographers out at every game this season. We're finally able to do that again now that some of the restrictions that were in place last year are not there this year. So our extremely talented cameramen and camerawomen are back out there on the sidelines shooting these games, and we got a great shot of what I think you and I both feel like was the play of the week this week. And it was to me, watching the game, this was kind of the moment where I said, yeah, this team is legit. This team is going to win a lot of games this year for sure. So Jameson Williams, we talked about him during the offseason. Pretty fun to see how good he was out there. I mean, Nick Saban once again pulling somebody from the transfer portal from we've seen him do it from the JUCO ranks in the past, but you know, we have this new element added to the sport of the transfer portal of guys going straight from one school to another. And Nick Saban uses it to go and get a guy who right now looks like maybe one of the best wide receivers in America.
Yeah, amazing story that I joked in a text with you, I think, during the game or before the game that people were calling the Henry To'oTo'o story amazing in terms of and I'm like, yeah, for Alabama it is. This all SEC linebacker leaves Tennessee and comes to Alabama. The rich get richer. I mean, the same seems to be true for Jameson Williams. He leaves a team that Alabama just beat in the national championship game, and he comes and gives Alabama the deep threat that may have left in terms of Devontae Smith leaving, Jalen Waddle leaving, et cetera, Jerry Jeudy, those guys like that, people wondering who's going to fill those roles in the future for Alabama. And Jameson Williams just came out and proved that he's a top guy, right? Like, he is a receiver that is going to be catching a lot of balls in 2021. So he was entertaining first game out. Can't wait to see what he can do in the future.
And Scott Clark
great
also,
camera work.
Yeah, there we go. From our excellent folks who were both in Atlanta this weekend, Clay Yeager and Laura Goldman, who shot a bunch of the plays from this game. Go and check them out on wherever you're watching this. If you go to the YouTube channel or Facebook page, we've got several plays that we shot from the game, including, by the way, a play that a couple of folks are saying they think should have been play of the week for us, which is the Trey Sanders touchdown. It was definitely fun to see from an emotional arc standpoint. The Trey Sanders touchdown, I think, was maybe the better play. Really, really great to see Trey Sanders get back out there and looked great. I mean, a totally different running style, I think, from Jace McClellan and Brian Robinson. So a real change of pace when he was on the field during the game.
Yeah, that is truly an amazing story. And our colleague Mike Roddick at AL.com wrote a great story about going behind the scenes on Trey Sanders' injury and his recovery. Just really harrowing stuff. And it's just amazing that he came back from that and was able to play in a football game, let alone doing other things and produce the way that he did. So fantastic play for sure. And obviously what led to the 94-yard touchdown, the defensive stop, the goal line stand there from Alabama. Great play. One of the plays of the game, in my opinion, because a big question mark was Alabama's obviously great on offense, and they've been trending in that direction for the past several years. But that a lot of people thought that meant the defense took a back seat to it and sort of regressed.
I was one of them for sure.
Yeah, for sure. But with so many starters coming back, recruiting at the level that Saban obviously does, the defense did have a lot of promise going into the season, and they lived up to that too. The defense looks very strong, very fast and athletic, and for them to stop a team in a quarterback like Derek King 4th-and-1 essentially, and have a goal line stand first game of the year. I thought that was incredibly impressive. So easily one of the best plays of the game that led into the play of the game we just shared. So fantastic sequence.
Yeah, will be very interesting to see how this defense holds up and how they look against. I mean, look, there's going to be several elite offenses that this team has to play this year, but I know we're all thinking about Ole Miss right now. It was the game that scared Alabama the most last year, so that's going to be a real test. Is how is this? And look, we also now have seen the Ole Miss offense looks like they're going to be pretty good again, and they look like they're built to frustrate even really good defenses. So
hey, look,
I'm curious to see how this defense matches up. That might be one of the best matchups in all of college football this year, is what looks like a fantastic Alabama defense versus that Ole Miss offense.
Yeah, but will Lane Kiffin steal our defensive signals this year, Matt? That's what happened last year.
Yeah,
they're cheating. They're cheating, Paul.
Yeah, certainly some allegations of that.
I didn't make the allegations.
No, but Anthony also pointing out DeMarco Hellams didn't even play in this game. Yeah. They sat him. He was not severely injured, but they just figured, hey, if he's not 100%, let's not even put him out there. So
Brian Ray too.
Yeah. So I mean, definitely going to be there is certainly a decent chance the defense actually could get better than what we saw in that first game. So pretty impressive stuff to start us out. Folks, we're going to go ahead and wrap it up there for this week, I think, but we will be obviously coming to you here tomorrow with tons of coverage of Alabama versus Mercer. We're going to have a pregame show tomorrow morning with Simone Eli, who is our regular pre- and post-game show host now, and I'm in that show as well as a secondary feature. And then we'll be back after the game. We'll have Nick Saban's press conference after the game. We'll have highlights. We'll have all kinds of good stuff for you guys for Alabama's first home game of the season, first home game back since a lot of stuff has happened. So,
hey, who's the Mercer mascot, Matt?
Mercer is the Bears, I believe.
All right.
Yeah.
I was quizzing you. Good job.
Yeah. So there we go. Let's all have a great weekend. Please be safe wherever you're going, especially if you're going to the game. Please try and make good decisions and be safe out there. And we will see you guys again next week on Bammers next Thursday.